Next, we have our first fireside chat with a very special guest. Here to moderate that fireside chat, he was formerly the CBDO of Tomachain, which is Southeast Asia's largest public blockchain, and his 15-year professional career spans across 7 countries as a technology entrepreneur and management consultant for startups. Please welcome the COO of Minterest Finance and the moderator of this one, Kyn Chaturvedi. Joining Kyn, he's an Elon Musk fanboy, a blockchain and crypto veteran since 2011, an armchair economist, psychologist, and technologist with a heavy emphasis on equality, liberty, and resistance to entrenched systems. He's an impatient futurist. Please welcome, put your virtual hands together for Dewdney and yeah, take it away, boys. The first fireside chat.
Awesome. Hey, how's everybody doing? I mean, I don't know how we live up to that. How we live up to that intro.
That presentation was amazing.
Yeah, I feel really hyped up, and I wanted, Kyn, I wanted this to be an actual fireside chat. So, although you're the moderator and you should have brought the fire.
Thank you so much, Dylan.
Yeah, I hope I brought the fire in. I'll bring the fire more than one way for the presentation.
I feel the
fireside today.
Warmth there, Dylan. Thank you so much. And you know, I really have the ultimate pleasure in being able to interview you on this. You know, as the CEO of Kyn Network, you know, we've been working together for on and off for the last several months. So you know, it really is such an honor to be doing this. And you know, so I thought maybe you know, what we could do is really dial in, you know, let's, you know, we had that beautiful video package, but maybe we could start off just kind of giving a briefer on what Kyn really is before we kick off and talking about, you know, about data and how data is the new oil.
Absolutely. So it was a really good segue, that video, actually, because it kind of frames the overall context for which, you know, we're building Kyn, which is, although we're, you know, kind of this narrative is cropped up around us being sort of like Polkadot, Oracle, and things like that. It's sufficient for what we do, or it's not sufficient for what we do. I think we do so much more, and we have sort of this broader vision of trying to accelerate the world's transition to DeData. In other words, to decentralized data systems. Becoming, for lack of a better word, a thing. And I think what that means for us is that in the same way that DeFi sort of unlocked and operationalized traditional financial instruments for crypto, we see DeData unlocking and operationalizing data for that's been sort of locked up in different silos throughout sort of in the past historically. So we think that this holds great promise, and I think that that's a really worthy vision for us, because it's going to, I think, unlock a lot of value for individuals and companies alike. The best way to conceptualize Kyn then is sort of it's like a cross between 3 different projects that people may know of. So the first would be Chainlink and Oracle, where we're taking off-chain information, getting it on-chain. The second would be more like the Graph, where we're building querying functions. And the third would be more like Ocean Protocol, where we're setting up the context for a decentralized data marketplace.
No, that's actually really cool. And I think, you know, one thing we were talking about earlier, and as you mentioned with Kyn, is, you know, when it comes to information, it comes to data, when we think about blockchains themselves, they've really been siloed entities, right? I mean, they're not able to talk to each other, not able to get access to outside information. And, you know, right now, when it comes to the Oracle space that's really growing, you know, we're finally able to, you know, these blockchains are growing arms and legs. They're able to finally walk around. And they're able to communicate with each other. And, you know, so when we think about, you know, what oracles are actually providing, getting access to this outside information, which has really been powering DeFi so far, we're also seeing, you know, a lot of players coming into the space. There's so many oracles launching, and even the older ones, which are kind of evolving incredibly. So I guess, you know, when we think about the overall Oracle landscape, how do you think through this? How do you make up kind of this Oracle landscape today? What goes through your mind?
So I think wherever you see a use case in crypto, you're going to see a ton of product crop up around it. And Oracle services are sort of one of the few real use cases that are generating revenue, uh, uh, and that's a rare thing in crypto.
It is, right?
um, so I mean, the major use case of crypto so far has been speculation, right? And only more recently have we seen sort of these composite products kind of come out products come out as a result of composite situations and circumstances. So we have these traditional financial instruments that in DeFi we've got these functionalities that are reminiscent of traditional financial instruments like yield. Um, but with oracles, it's a use case, and whenever there's a use case in crypto, it's quite a rare thing, and everybody wants to jump on top of it. So I think that I think just having a real product market fit is probably one of the bigger reasons behind so many oracles coming to the fore, especially in the last year. But there have been, I mean, the idea behind solving the Oracle problem is actually quite old. Like that's not really like a new idea. It needed to be the way that it's been solved, and the way that it's been solved in a remunerative way has been necessary because of DeFi and that composite circumstance. Um, so I think that as we move forward, though, I really see sort of the price feeding use case of oracles as being a bit more commoditized as time goes on. Like I think it's just sort of the leading edge of a number of different use cases above and beyond just price feeding for DeFi. Like I very much see us in I call it like the selling books phase of Amazon, where this is just sort of like the selling books phase of Amazon, the price feeding Oracle services, in my view. I think there are going to be a huge number of different use cases, of which price feeding Oracle services are just one. But right now it's really hot, so I think there's a lot of attention and interest to it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, when until today, when we started looking at kind of price feeds, that really became the entire space for us. We're like, okay, what can provide us with the best price feed data, the most decentralized, the highest quality? How can we get it? How can we get it sourced perhaps in the most inexpensive way? And so, it really did empower the entire DeFi economy, because we ended up relying so much on this external data. But then we also kind of got a bit maybe caught up in terms of the idea that perhaps is that really the only thing that we can really go after. I know that with some of the other oracles in the space, they've been looking at data feeds in other areas, whether it's temperature information, weather information, and they're trying to find new use cases for that. But of course, you have to kind of make sure you're finding enough sources. You need to make sure it's decentralized enough. You're able to then feed it in the right way. But the kind of the one of the questions then is really when we think beyond price and price feeds, external price feeds, when we think about the data, and I think you've been calling it DData. What does that really represent? How do we think about DData, and what are perhaps some of the other lower hanging fruits to look at? Because as you said, yeah, right now you're like in Amazon selling books back in the 90s. Now, if we think about more areas, what does that mean? How can we contextualize that?
Yeah, and I wanna I guess I wanna like underline this and say that the examples that I can present to you are in no way satisfactory for the number of examples or the sorts of solutions that will end up coming to the fore in the next 2 or 3 years. Um, I think it will take that time frame to develop, which may seem like long for people in crypto, but it's actually quite short, I think, for an entirely new paradigm to develop. And I'm a big believer in this concept of Ray Kurzweil's, which is the law of accelerating returns. So Bitcoin has taken 12 years to kind of effloresce, and really I'd say it effloresced like a few years ago. Ethereum, this concept of smart contracts took about half as much time from 2015 till now. NFTs took maybe a couple years from a conceptual imperative to being in practice. And I do expect that the next wave of crypto to be actually focused within this DeData kind of conceptual framework. So I really only think it's going to be a couple of years before a lot of these use cases above and beyond price feeding start becoming operational, because the reasoning behind it makes so much sense in the sense that, like, hey, I've got a company, I've got a project, and I have access to all this data, and it's just sort of sitting idle there. It's like a crypto asset. It's like to make this really present for a lot of the crypto oriented viewers, it's like holding BTC, for 3 or 4 years. Crap, man, I wish I could get some yield on that. That would have been great, right? So the concept of DData is just yielding the value of your data, right? Like over time, at least is in terms of how you could punch it into like a value layer framework like Kyn, or we're not the only one, and I don't ever expect that we'll be the only one that are within this umbrella of DData. I mean, Chainlink very much is a part of that. I think Ocean Protocol, Oasis Labs, there's a lot of people working, a lot of great minds working on this problem. But anyway, I just want to underline all that because I think it's useful to underline. But I think that some of the really, really cool use cases that I talk about with partners, and I talk about with people that get people like, oh my God, that's really cool, man. One is a little farther out, perhaps, but I really like the idea of tokenizing your genomic data. A lot of people don't realize, you do a swab, you send it off to 23andMe. A lot of people don't realize like half their business line is actually selling your genomic data to researchers. There's some interesting interesting little wrinkles in this business where, if you have an interesting genome, you're worth a little bit more to researchers than people with a less interesting genome. Paradoxically, if you have more, problems, unfortunately, perhaps, or pathologies, that's actually more attractive to researchers. So anyway, you could set up the context for tokenizing your genomic data. Individuals selling that, is it I think I read somewhere the average cost of your genome is like $20 or something, which may not seem like a huge amount, but theoretically, then the total addressable market of genomic data would be like $140 billion, times that by the number of people approximately on the earth. So that's pretty neat. The other example that I think is a little bit more low-hanging fruit would be, for example, flight insurance settlement. So say I'm building like a flight insurance DAO. I get a lot of people to pay in a stable coin to that DAO on a monthly basis. And get that contract live. I divert a percentage of that contract, obviously, to ops and DevOps and perpetuity or something, just to make sure that it's, it can run. And the rest goes to a settlement pool. So people submit their flight info. It's very seamless. Or rather, flight info gets submitted. They see, oh, my flight is late. I get automatically paid to my crypto wallet. That's just like one really interesting example. There are other examples. You could have, for example, a really valuable price feed, a really valuable data feed for, it could be weather reports, right, that are funneled through various weather reports, election outcomes. Blockchain voting is like a really horrible idea, but you can validate a vote, or you can validate an election. That might be interesting. So you can feed thousands of local election results through an API feed and then validate that on our system. that has obvious importance above and beyond any monetary value. And especially in the era of us not being sure about results, it might be an extra kind of bulwark against or cushion against some of our worst impulses. So yeah, these are all like really interesting use cases above and beyond price feeding in this overall DData umbrella. And I think we get focused on price feeding because this is the world we're living in. And it's really, but yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I mean, you're absolutely correct, and that's, sometimes we get a little narrow vision on that, in terms of a little myopic in terms of what can actually data do, and I think that's a very interesting idea. I think what you're talking about, kind of milestone-based activation when a certain event occurs, when you're streaming data, a certain other action takes place. I think one thing you were talking about the other day to me was, even for something simple like when, a vesting period or something like that for a token, when it reaches a certain market cap, you can end up, at that point in time, you can unlock certain bonus tokens for investors. So you can look at information in a very different way. And when you're talking about even in the healthcare side, a couple of years ago, I was working I was consulting for a firm, a diagnostics firm, and what they were doing, they have so much healthcare data, and they wanted to anonymize it and then to be able to provide that on the blockchain in a sort of a decentralized way, but they didn't really know how to bring it to market. And this is back in 2017. It was quite a while ago, and it was one of the things that they were like, how do we actually make this actionable? How do we create a marketplace around this? And this is obviously something that even you have been thinking about, and I know that some of the projects that you've also been possibly looking to partner with are really kind of data marketplaces. I think like big data protocol is, I think, one group I think you've been kind of talking to and things like that. How do you? So I guess when we think about like the evolution of data as oil, and I think this is something you said, right? How do you think about, I guess, the marketplaces, data marketplaces, and how do you see that kind of feeding into the future of whether it's oracles or kind of the work that you see kind of Kyn doing?
Yeah, yeah. As you're talking, I'm just like, my mind is spinning because I think all this stuff happens from the conceptual framework. It's like a composite, right? Like you can't get to this stuff until the rails are created. Like so I've a lot of this stuff has been conceptualized. Like this is not a new idea to tokenize a genome, right? As crazy as it maybe perhaps sounds to some people's ears, the idea has been around for 2 or 3 years, but there's been no context to sort of like, for them, there's been no marketplace to buy and sell genomic data in a P2P way, right? Similar to, so the vision always precedes like the vision always like precedes the context, right? I want to build a building, but there's a swamp in front of me. You can't, you have to like, you have to raise the ground, you have to level things, you have to have all these other vendors to provide you the materials, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, yeah, I don't know if I'm like going off topic from your question, but I think, or so I think that all this really happens as a composite. And right now, what's happening is the rails, in my opinion, are being built for those types of operations to take place between entities that want to basically buy and sell data, right? And this becomes like a line item for various projects. I see enterprise, like if I'm an insurance company and I have a flight insurance product, and then all of a sudden some upstart guy builds a group or girls, like, or whatever, non-gender identifying, build something on a DAO, right, that completely disrupts what I'm up to, I'm probably going to want to get out in front of that. So I do see us potentially making a lot more connections with an enterprise as time goes on, where we say, hey, like, would you like to get some rev gen from data that's just like going back again, that's just sitting idle? within your, and there are all sorts of like interesting ways that this ends up becoming a common good where, for example, in gene therapy, a lot of cancer patients now are getting customized treatments based on their genetic profile, right? Um, and you can start thinking about how valuable that is to people, right? Like if uh, if I know, for example, that a certain drug mix or therapeutic mix works well with this person's genome as opposed to any others, that's good information to have, right? Um, so yeah, these are all ideas that kind of come to mind when we're talking about this, and it always makes me think of like late 2014 when Bitcoin people said like Ethereum, like a programmable blockchain is really dumb. Like there's no point to it, because you're only thinking of like that first use case, and that first use case was Bitcoin and money, right? And all the stuff that comes after, like it just seems like this is never going to work because how do we unlock this data? Nobody wants to sell this data. How do we determine what it's worth? We don't know. I think this is all going to be really rapidly figured out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I mean, initially it does take a little bit of time, but there's a point where it'll just become a no-brainer. And I guess maybe it's sort of part of that, the entire, when we think about the adoption of technology of sorts, right? I mean, you're going from, we were kind of in an innovator, early adopter phase. You have to kind of cross that chasm, bringing on more enterprises, bringing on more end users to kind of eventually kind of reach that point where you have this momentum kind of building forward. And you were talking about building rails. We don't really have those rails as of yet with this other data. So maybe hypothetically, when we think about that, what do you think it's going to take to start to build these rails into these other areas of data demand? Essentially, do you need to look at targeting specific enterprises, specific industries? Do you need to make like more friendly APIs? What are the next set of steps that you see in order to kind of create those rails and kind of move that adoption forward so that decentralized data that's being provided is actually considered to be useful and in demand?
Yeah. Well, I already think that DData is happening right now. It's just happening under the guise of oracles, right? So I think that it's already happening, and I think that we can look at the value created from that as a great example to hearken to when we're having other conversations, and I think it's a great parallel. In terms of actually practically how does this look? Well, we have conversations with various innovation departments. I'm hoping that we can make better connections between different DData projects, so that we can have some sort of consortium that we can push forward this idea, whether it's Kyn or whether it's or anybody else. I think everybody benefits from this, because we're just in a very like early stage of this, but I think it's going to rapidly develop. I think the low hanging fruit definitely are things that are more automatable. I don't even think that's a word, um, or more like flight insurance DAO. I think is probably. I mean, there are some projects kind of working on it right now, that I know of. I wouldn't be surprised if some of that is operational within like a year and a half. And once enterprise sees these things operational or sees money coming in, or a customer success story where they're like, oh my god, this is so cool, I just did this in my wallet. I like, it'll be on TikTok and they'll say like, this is how it works, like and I just got it and it just came into my crypto wallet or whatever wallet, like whatever the back ending is. And then that's when everything happens, right? Like that's the point at which everybody goes aha, and it makes sense, and I don't want to lose money, I want to make money. um that's
Yeah.
and I think that's really how it kind of practically happens. um And in the meantime, obviously our role with Kyn is we try to kickstart a lot of these conversations. We try to get people, Oracle programmers, coming onto our network to build cool Oracle scripting parameters and stuff like that. But yeah.
I mean, certainly, automated makes it much easier. I mean, one of the things when we think about external use cases for oracles or blockchain technology in general, are you able to solve a real pain point? And can you? And one of those key pain points is cost, right? So, you've been talking about things like automated settlements of when you're talking about, say, insurance or issues around flights. And there's a whole set of paperwork, calls, emails. There's so much that takes place in order to kind of have this entire settlement done, including disputes. And the moment that you're able to then look at that entire cost structure, what does that cost a company to do, and even the pain of the actual customer itself, and if you can minimize that to nothing, all of a sudden you're adding a lot of value there. And I think this is a key area, whether it's the airline industry, whether it's hotels, the healthcare profession. Where is it that you can just find something and just say, you know what, I'll automate this and I'll just reduce that pain point entirely, and a huge cost aspect of that. So that's certainly a good way of thinking about it. And I guess as you were talking about this consortium, I guess group of people that are kind of gathering data together. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like what is what exactly is going on that front? What's the the purpose of kind of having a consortium and gathering data and sharing that data? How do you see that playing into all of this?
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think for this to all work, it's going to be incumbent upon every player in the DeData ecosystem to figure out whether it's whether we kind of like make ourselves figure it out or whether it organically happens, some sort of standard. And I think that once that standard happens, things will be a bit more, will happen a bit more quickly. I won't pretend and say we're hoping that we become a bit of a standard. But I think that from the side of like figuring out and sharing premium data feeds and things like that, I think that that would be a good idea. Whether like regardless of the platform, I think data feeders will probably, people who possess or entities who possess great data feeds will want to probably monetize that, and it'll probably go to the best, wherever they feel that they're best rewarded. So what we've tried to do at Kyn is set up the context for, I really say we're more of a game theoretical company than a technology company. So in the sense that we're an incentivization company more than anything. And I think that that's really what it comes down to.
So when you think about from incentives, I think you've been utilizing your community to kind of build out unique price feed data, or you're incentivizing to kind of build things out on Kyn network. Is that correct? I mean, how?
Yeah. So I mean, we obviously we can't kickstart. I mean, the use cases above and beyond price feeding are only limited by two things. They only need two things. Can it be represented in zeros and ones? And what's the second thing? This is an early morning for me in my part of the world.
No
Can they be represented by? But can they be represented by zeros and ones? And are they able to get on chain in sort of like in this way that is callable, right? Like, does it exist out there to call on chain in an API? And so those are the only two features that you really need. So we want to leave it up to the imagination of, like, we can't do every single use case. So we've figured out a number of parameters to reward people who are either data feeding or setting up an Oracle scripting parameter, so they get paid in perpetuity, for example. for setting up an Oracle scripting parameter that a lot of people use. That's a really great idea, we think. So yeah, I know we're getting low on time though, so I want to tie this off somehow.
Yeah, no worry. Yeah, we are actually
Yeah.
for a long time. So I guess maybe dial in when we I guess just to tie things up when we think about uh, data on the blockchain, moving forward, maybe from Kylan's perspective, how do you see the next 6 to 8 months kind of rolling out? Obviously, with Polkadot Network, maybe taking a little time to get launched. I know you're also going kind of cross-chain, but how do you see yourself and Kylan in the next year when it comes to on the data side, on the Oracle side, and anything else that you're building out?
So yeah, I see us. Obviously, we are hooking into the price feeding Oracle stuff. Like that's low hanging fruit for us, and we're providing that to a lot of our partners. We're able to do that. We think at a magnitude decrease in cost based on being Polkadot, which is awesome. Very bullish about Polkadot we're building there. And then I think in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to start seeing these use cases actually operational above and beyond price feeding. So I would not be surprised if there's an Oracle scripting parameter that ends up getting developed. For example, we talked about the flight insurance style. Could totally happen.
All right, great. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much, Dylan, for letting me host you here, and
a
it's been a real
pleasure.
honor. And so
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, thank everybody for participating and watching this session. It's been fun.
thank you. Likewise, and thank you so much to BlockDown. It's not every day we get the opportunity to speak to so many people. So thank you so much.